Joining me now are two political analysts who I've known for years and familiar faces to viewers of With All Due Respect. They're here to talk about a new memoir, Believer, My 40 Years in Politics, which Robert Draper in the New York Times called a well-written and often moving account of how a committed liberal measures his principles against the bruising imperatives of high-stake politics. It's a fantastic book. I've read the whole thing, and I've also written it. Mark Halperin and John Heilman, thanks for coming in.
Great to be here, David.
John,
good to see you. Thank you. God, I couldn't be more honored.
So let me ask you guys. I wrote about my early life and my early career in newspapering, and as a Chicago Tribune reporter covering Chicago politics, covering some national politics, and so on. In your view, and given how you know me, how much did my early experiences as a political reporter contribute to my understanding of the process and my ability to operate later as a political strategist and an advisor?
David, I think my most compelling story in this book of your journalistic time was your encounter with the late Mike Royko. I want you to tell that story, but I think if you can tangle with Mike Royko and emerge intact, that teaches you a lot of things about politics.
Actually, you know, it's an interesting story because I learned a lot about life over time, and I look back at that story and have a different perspective on it. I was handed, when I was a City Hall bureau chief at the Chicago Tribune, I was handed a story about the Byrne administration. Jane Byrne was the mayor of Chicago. Corruption in that administration, and it was particularly about hiring at the airport, right, and patronage hiring, and they gave me a list of the sons and daughters of prominent people who had been hired there, including a lot of commissioners, but one of the names on the list was the son of Mike Royko, who was the star columnist of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Also an influential figure in Chicago.
And a revered figure, and a revered figure to me as a young reporter. We all looked up to Mike, and the source said, if you have any integrity, you use all the names. And I was 25 years old. I didn't like the challenge to my integrity. So I called Mike, and I said, I want to talk to you. I met him over at the Billy Goat Tavern below Michigan Avenue, which is where he often contemplated his next column. And I explained, you know, what I had. And he told me the story about his son, and his son was troubled. He had quit school, and Mike said, if you're going to leave school, you got to find a job. He went out and talked to a friend of Mike who was close to Mayor Byrne, and they got him this job at the airport unbeknownst to Mike, and Mike said, I didn't have the heart to tell him he couldn't take it. I didn't make much of it in the story. I included a line, but the editor of my paper came over and threw it back on my desk and said, we're not going to get into it with Mike Royko. There were some expletives in there. And so the story didn't run, but it soured my relationship with Royko, which was pretty good to that point, for the rest of his life. The thing that I remember when I think back, or that I think about when I recall that story, now that I'm a father and recently a grandfather, is what it must have felt like to be in Mike's position. His wife had died. He was a widower at the time. His son was troubled and went on to have great troubles. And I know now that I wouldn't have included the name in that story. I wouldn't have been goaded into it. But this comes under the category of I wasn't young enough to know everything. You know, I was so young I thought I knew everything at the time. So in this book, I spend a whole chapter talking about mayor's races, a real passion of mine. How do you think those urban races, what lessons do you think I derived from those urban races, and just observing what you saw later, how much did it inform my work for Obama?
A couple things stand out for me. One is coalition politics, and how whether you're a white mayor trying to appeal to a broad non-white coalition, or vice versa, an African-American candidate trying to appeal to a broad coalition, including white voters. And the other thing is mayors have to get things done. And I think your ability to find the marriage between poetry and prose, governing and campaigning, pretty effective. Chicago is you're based now. You're born here in New York City. In what way are you now a man of Chicago as opposed to New York today?
Well, it's been 42 years. I thoroughly identify myself as a Chicagoan. I come home to New York, and there are still landmarks from my youth that I remember. I still have a warm feeling about New York. But Chicago is a special place to me. It's a big city with a small town sensibility. There's a real strong sense of identification
and Barack
there.
Obama also was not born in Chicago. Is he every bit as much a man of Chicago as you are now, do you think?
He is a man of Chicago. I hope that he becomes a citizen of Chicago again, a full-time citizen after this.
People think he wants to move here and bring the library here. Chances of that are what?
Well, I don't know. I think these are separate issues. I don't know where he's going to live. I would be stunned if the library were not in Chicago, and deeply disappointed, because it's so much part of his legacy. Barack Obama spent so much time trying to revive the South Side of Chicago. He could do it with one gesture here in bringing that library to the South Side of Chicago. Chicagoans claim him in a way that New Yorkers just don't. And it would be a terrible blow, frankly, to the city, and I think to his legacy if it didn't go there. But I understand that there are all kinds of considerations, not the least of which is the financing of these institutions. So we'll see what happens. One other lesson I have to tell you that I learned from mayor's races, though, and everything you said is right. I learned a lot about race. I also learned a lot about the impact that incumbents have on elections, even when they're retiring. I did a race here, and I think you and I talked about it at the time, for mayor of New York after when Rudy Giuliani was stepping down. And what I learned in that race and in previous races was that the incumbent defines the race even when they're leaving, and people never want the replica of what they have. They always want the remedy, even if the incumbent is popular. And you saw it in that race. People didn't want another Rudy Giuliani, at least until 9/11 happened. I've seen it in other cities. That's true of presidential races as well. I think the two offices that are most akin to each other in terms of how people relate to the office holder are mayor and president. They're the most personal relationship that people have in politics.
I want you to ask me what the biggest, most surprising insight about Barack Obama was in this book, and then I'll turn to you.
You know, John, I was wondering what you thought the most significant insight into Barack Obama.
How much profanity he uses. Now, I want to know what you think is the most significant insight that people don't know, like will come as a surprise to people about President Obama that's in your book.
Well, hopefully, he is depicted in sort of these cartoon depictions as aloof, as not emotionally connected. But in my relationship with him, when bad things happened, he was the guy who picked us all up. If you had something personal going in your life, he would come in and flop down in your office in the White House. I think he's a very warm and approachable person, and hopefully some of that came through.
Along with the profanity.
Why did you write the book?
I wrote the book because, for a couple of reasons. One is that I didn't want people to believe that my life began in 2007 when Barack Obama became president. Everything I did in my life preceding that kind of led up to that. And I've had a long and interesting life in politics, 150 campaigns, had an interesting life in journalism, had an interesting life leading up to that. And all of it is about a fundamental belief I have that this stuff matters. We tend to cover it as horse races, we tend to cover it as a game, but the truth of the matter is this is how we determine what kind of future we're going to have, and that is what makes it meaningful. That's what makes it important. I want people to believe, even in these cynical times, that politics matters and that it's worth being in the arena. So
the book is called "Believer: My 40 Years in Politics."
It was supposed to be called, but they couldn't fit it on the cover. Believer: How My Idealism Survived 40 Years in Politics, and that's really what it's about.